what I primarily wanted to talk about, I've touched on this a little bit the last couple of days, is David Brooke, the motivation coach, and what does that mean and how did that happen? And I think a lot of what has really changed me, I mentioned earlier that I had a teacher in high school asked me to come back and teach or talk to his senior class when I was back at the first year at the University of Washington. And ever since then, I for lack of a better term, I'd say I kind of got the bug. And I mentioned it also yesterday about will it make a difference that you lived, or in this case, me living. And so that's kind of really what started it. But I think the thing that probably shaped me the most, and is where I've been able to connect with people, is that when you look at people, and we've all been in situations like this, when people talk, and well, what does he know? What does she know? I mean, are they just teaching off a book or what have you? And as I look back at my life and the experiences I went through, you're able to relate to so many people and the things that they've gone through. And for instance, when I was 16, my folks got divorced, and if it wasn't bad enough already, I had to go to court and testify against my father because he was going to have my mother committed to what we called an insane asylum back then. And then Mom got all messed up, and it was suicidal, and would call me pretty much every 2 weeks and tell me she was going to commit suicide unless I left the university bookstore where I was working as I went to the U, and would come over and talk to her. And then in the meantime is that I'd had my two best friends killed in a car accident in our first year at the University of Washington in a fraternity, and then several more friends killed in Vietnam. And I've mentioned this theme a little bit about the death, and that's where I've really kind of zeroed in on goal setting and never giving up. And that's so much of what I talk about. In fact, this one class I mentioned of several I do, How to Get Revenue in 2007, it talks about 10 steps to get more passion in your life and have a more fulfilling life, and really, and in some cases, kind of against a lot of odds. And I also did I touched on some of this yesterday, so I'm not going to spend much time on it, but the real estate and Mr. Millionaire, then dead broke again, and Mr. Millionaire and dead broke again, and that'll change in a pretty quick fashion, and your level of humility, if you will, really rises. And then my mom died. So then she died of cancer, and that was a tough one. She was my best friend and probably one of the biggest people that influenced my life, from David, where's the sign? Where's it say life's easy? You know, or you're going to deserve this or something, and life can be very difficult. And then through a series of bad jobs and different things I got into, I decided to get into hydroplaning because I was this daredevil guy. So I raced hydroplanes, and I became a national champion, and I was on Green Lake and Lake Spanaway, Lake Washington, and in 5 years I saw 5 guys die. And so then that was enough of that, and that was kind of before the capsules. And so I thought, you know what, I had a lot of fun, and Connor hadn't been born yet, but I wanted to kind of live on that edge, and we've got a lot of people here that have talked about that earlier. And then shortly after that, my dad committed suicide. And I remember that episode because he was the same one I mentioned earlier that I pointed to and said, yeah, watch me, Dad, I'll prove it to you. But when we think about our childhood, and I often make this contention, you always hear this sort of tough thing about people that have been molested as a child, but they then molest people, and that's their excuse because I was molested. And as terrible as I can only imagine that could be, who's going to break the chain here? Who's going to the one that's going to be, I'm going to stop this behavior. And I'm probably one of the most positive people I know, having gone through several, if not quite a few traumas, and my father was the most negative. You know how much it costs to raise you kids? I just read that it's $150,000 a kid. There's 5 of you. That's $750,000. Good morning, Dad. What's good about it? Dad, what if you won the lottery? You know how much taxes you'd have to pay on that kind of winnings? And so you get that kind of choice. And then, thankfully, Connor was born. And for those of you that have children, or the what do we call them? Fur child. I honestly thought there must be a country named Fur. I just didn't quite get that at first. And so that as a pet or as a child, it completely changes you. And about 6 months after Connor was born, my sister-in-law died. She was 40 years old, and that was my older brother's wife. And he and I were very, very close. And a year and a half later, Dana died. She was 38 years old, had been hooked on prescription painkillers, and some of us have talked about some of the things that are challenging there. But what made it particularly challenging for me, and this whole theme that I kind of talk about, and this is really I wanted to speak to this today, is why you don't give up. It doesn't matter what it is. And in that case, arrested for prescription fraud, 3 times in substance abuse places while I'm raising the boys by myself. And then when she died, after that, lost the house, lost the business. I'd had my own business. I'd worked at Nordstrom for a long time, started my own business. Lost all the money, and of course there was no life insurance because she never went to get the test because guess what? You've got to do the blood and urine. So she wouldn't have passed it. And I always thought she just forgot it. So, and then it's interesting because when somebody dies, and I certainly know we've had some themes through here, and I'm very respectful of that, and Veronica, we talked about it too, is that when you then throw money on top of it, it's just about disastrous because these people call you, yeah, I'm really sorry to hear about your wife, where's our money? You know, and so then if it's the IRS or Department of Revenue, so it gets to be pretty overwhelming. And in the process of that, and I'd mentioned this too, is after I then got into a bad marriage, and then I walk out of there because that was a disaster, and I'm sleeping on this piece of foam. And I mentioned this also, but I really want to mention it one more time, and it's about as personal as you get when you make a decision as whether you'd go jump off that bridge. And I made a decision I wouldn't do it. And I think for those of us that are a little older, I think I'm fairly easily the oldest one in the group here, but I can tell you that once you make that decision, you look at all these years you've lived in this body, and you kind of get to know yourself pretty well. At least hopefully you should. And that's, again, a lot of what we're talking about today, because if you know that person pretty well, if you're willing to make the changes, Kathy, we talked about that too, right? What better chance you can have to attract somebody that's going to be similar to you. So after the bad marriage, then I told Connor. Connor was in third grade. And I said, we were living on this piece of foam. We got the apartment down below. All the money was gone. And here you are talking Mr. Multimillionaire at one time. And so I made a decision. I said to Connor, I said, I'll tell you what, I'll have you a house before the 5th grade. Now that was 2.5 years from the time I did it. And I want to make sure that I make this really clear on goal setting and on never giving up. That the whole theme, at least to my hopefully inspiration to people I've taught before, is not giving up, but also in goal setting, make sure you do it in bite-sized pieces. Don't take on too much because it'll drive you crazy. And you'll be so overwhelmed, and the enormity of it will drive you just, batty. And I remember once when I had 2 cords of wood delivered. 1 cord wasn't good enough for me. It had to be 2. And I think it's 4 by 8 by 4. I've never seen so much wood in my life. I mean, it filled up this entire corner of like this room right here in my driveway. So I went outside and started putting it away, and I'd worked on it for a while, and it hadn't even a dent. And I thought, this is going to take me a couple years to put this away. But then I thought, well, hold on a second. Why don't you take a different approach? I went in, it says cold. Went inside, got some leather gloves so I wouldn't get any slivers. Got a radio station on, got some coffee, put a hat on, whatever. Came outside again and thought, don't even think about it. Just start putting away one piece at a time. And sure enough, like 3 hours later, it was all inside, all stacked, and I couldn't even tell you how many pieces were there. But the point is that you do it in bite-sized pieces. And another thing, and I did mention this, I think it was to Kathy earlier, something that's been really, really helpful to me. When you're in trouble, and when different parts of your life, and again, death, destruction, whatever, I always wanted somebody to tell me, what do I do? I mean, if I need to get in shape, do 10 push-ups. If I need to lose some weight in my stomach, do some sit-ups. If I want to get some de-stressors, go out and run. But I never really had somebody tell me what to do. So what I kind of stumbled upon, I've done this ever since then, pretty much all my life, is I make a list of what I need to do. And don't worry about 2 to 12 or 2 to 15 or 20, but worry about number 1. And sometimes it was as basic as get a job. And as funny as that sounds, you know what? That's a lot more important than I have to sell this equipment from this business I had because it went belly up. That'll come in time. And then I decided when I told Connor about I'll have this house before the 5th grade, I didn't know if I was going to make it or not. And then I'm going to mention a couple things at the end about what I sort of like to leave people with as a result of a lot of things you deal with in your life. And I went out and I got a safety deposit box because I didn't trust the IRS from their business. They were coming after me. No sympathy whatsoever for your wife. You can't say it's really expected. Department of Revenue. And I eventually paid off all the people that I owed money to. Department of Revenue, IRS, but at that time I didn't trust them. So I put it, and I'd start putting little packs of money in this, as Connor called it, the gold box. And eventually, gosh, I think it got up to about 20,000. I mean, we were eating macaroni and cheese, so I could keep putting money in there. And 2 months before he started the 5th grade, it was really looking dismal. And we were still in the apartment, and I'd promised him this, I will get you a house again by the time you start the 5th grade. Something started to come together about early August, by a bunch of just oddball chances, but mostly because I never gave up in here, I went up and closed the deal on this house on August 31st, walked him up to the front of the house, gave him the keys, said, open this door. I said, go pick out the room that you want, because you've got your house. He started the 5th grade the next day. Now that's what I call cutting it close. But if you think you can do it, you can, and if you think you can't, you can't. And I don't care how many times somebody hears that. It's so very, very important. And then back to the girlfriend thing, 2 or 3 years working on myself, putting that little list up there. It really was never about getting the girlfriend or getting the boyfriend in the lady's case. But last year is when I finally put it up there. It's time to get a new girlfriend, and look what happened, even though I didn't believe it might happen. So what I'd like to leave you with is back to the, doesn't matter if it's been more traumatic or less traumatic or whatever, or how my life might relate to yours, except for the fact that there is a relationship there between people that have never had anything bad happen and people that have, and understand you got to get up, you got to dust yourself off, you got to get back in the race. And I see great body language from Veronica. She's nodding her head, as Catherine just told us. But it's so important, and you have to decide that you don't have a choice. But I would leave you with just a couple of things. If you can possibly do it, back to the push-ups, is you've just got to try to never stop exercising if you can. We talk about motion, equaling emotion. I've never stopped listening to CDs. I'm a big fan of a lot of motivational speakers, Tony Robbins and the like. And I never stopped taking classes. I've sat on that side of the room more than I've done on this side of the room. Very, very important. And I mentioned the constantly making to-do lists. And something else that was really key, and this one's a tough one, and we've already talked about it. I'm going to say it one more time, and that's learning to forgive yourself. You got to do that. Put it on your list. I don't care, forgive myself. Do the shredder exercise, whatever it takes. It's such a personal thing that we do, but it's just you and the person you see brushing your teeth. And I think the last thing, and I've said it so many times, but it just always bears repeating, is you just got to never, ever, ever give up. And when I walked up there with that key, and I couldn't even talk, it was just like the baseball story I told yesterday. Somehow it all came together, and if you never stop believing, and I always hope, at least if I get through to one person today or yesterday in the classes I did last week, I've made a difference, and that's what we're talking about. And there was an individual yesterday that said to me, well, that doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and I've tried that before, and this is no good. Well, yeah, it won't work. But if you never, ever stop believing and get to know that person in the mirror and really, really get personal with them, and it'll pay off. And again, some of the people I talked to today, there was this common theme. I've been working on it for this long. I've been doing this. You know, we know when we're born, but we don't know when we die. So you don't know when we don't know when we're going to feel better. We only know that if we keep going and keep going, that it can make a difference. And I think back on the day that Dana died, September 29th, 98, easily the lowest day of my life, even though there'd been many other things. And August 29th of this last year, I got a call from Kirkland Parks and Rec, Cascadia Community College, that had picked up 4 classes that I did. I got a job offer from Macy's, and I got a job offer from this fancy designer boutique that I run now, all in the same day between 12 and 2 in the afternoon. And I remember the only reason I appreciated it at that level was because of September 29th, 98. And you've got to have that basis. So please, please remember that. And I really do hope that I talk to a lot of you in the future, because it is a constant, it's like the cord of wood. You've got to take the piece every single day. You don't put your arms around it all at the same time. But it is a constant growth, there's those days you get down. You've got to take out your grateful list, which I keep. The 100 things I'm grateful for, whatever it might be. And that's a lot of what's in this class. But please remember that, and hang in there. So thank you.